Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into OTRAM's YouTube channel. Today's project, we're doing air lockers front and rear on a 200 series Land Cruiser. Today's video, we're going to do the install on the rear ARB. So let me cut to a time-lapse video of how we got to having the diff out. It's pretty boring and long, so we just time-lapsed it. Let's cut to that, and when that's done, we'll come back here and start on assembly of the air locker rear. Okay, we didn't want to bore everybody with the disassembly procedure for getting the axle shafts out. So here you can see Danny pulling the brake lines off and then getting ready to pull the calipers off so he can set those off to the side. And then he'll pull the rotor off and fish the e-brake cable out. And then you can take the four nuts that are on the back of the axle housing, you can take those loose, and then once all those are loose, the whole bearing assembly and axle shaft will pop out. And once both sides are done, you can start pulling the diff. Okay, so now we're up to today. We've got the locker, or the rear differential sitting here, ready to put the locker in. First thing we want to do is check the existing backlash. That way we know where to set the new locker to maintain the pattern of the gears that they've already taken a set to. So I've got our Noga arm and our dial indicator set up on here. And we can check, and we're just under 10 thousandths of backlash. So we'll write that down so we can note that for later. So we've got that set. We can take our arm off, set it over to the side. Then we can start marking things for disassembly. So same as we did on the other differential rebuild video, we're going to mark the bearing caps side to side. So I do 3 dots on one side, on all the pieces, and then we'll spin it around, and I do 4 dots on the other side. There we go. Then we can take 12 millimeter, take the adjuster screw off, or the adjuster locks rather. Pop those off. 17 millimeter and take the bearing caps off. Let's set these cleaned up. And we'll knock the parts tray over on the floor. Okay, now we've got everything out of our way. I'm going to spray this down with a little brake clean it off. That way we can make easy to follow marks to mark our airline drilling, and we'll come back. Okay, so we've got our housing cleaned up so we can do some markering. We got aluminum foil covering the pinion bearings so that when we drill, we don't get as much shavings in there. We're going to parts washer it again after we drill. So not a huge deal, but you want to keep as much out of there as you can. Consulted the air locker instructions, and they want a 7/16 hole right here for the bulkhead fitting. and then a 5/16 hole here right next to the bearing cap to feed the line through to hit that other hole. So we'll go ahead and start drilling those. We've got an 1/8 inch bit here to pilot. That casting is thick. Get a little cutting oil. Okay, it's going to take a while to drill this, so I'm going to finish drilling and we'll go ahead and tap the bulkhead to 1/4 inch pipe and wash this differential out, and then we'll come back. So we got all our holes drilled and tapped in the differential housing. That's in the automatic parts washer now, cleaning out. While that's doing its job, we can go ahead and pull the original carrier bearings off of the old carrier. So we've got our carrier bearing puller on there. We'll go ahead and zip those off. And you want to make sure the carrier and the race stay together, since they were matched and wore in together. Flip that over. Oh, I'm not coordinated today. We can set those aside to get cleaned up. And then we can go ahead and pop the ring off the old carrier. And it's just 17mm bolts. slide all the bolts back out of the way. Now you can just take a punch down through the holes and start knocking the ring off. Whew. This one's on there quite tight. There we go. Now I can just put the carrier off to the side since we don't need that. Readjust you there a little bit. And I like to wipe the back surface of the ring off and then take a good flat file. And just rub the file over the back side of the ring. This one looks pretty good. Sometimes you'll pick up high spots around the threads and just nicks and burrs. You just want to get all that smoothed out so when we put this on the new carrier, everything sits flat and we don't have variations in backlash. So we can go ahead and put this and the carrier bearings in the parts washer. And then once this comes out of the parts washer, I'll put it in the toaster oven at like 150 degrees for like a half an hour, just to expand it a little bit so it's easier to drop onto the carrier. And once that's done, we'll come back and start putting this back together. So we've had the new air locker differential hanging out in the freezer for a while to shrink it. We've got the ring gear in the toaster oven warmed up to 200 degrees so that hopefully they'll just drop together. So let me go grab the ring out of the oven real quick and put my gloves on with their awesome racing flames. Stick that on there, and when they're nice and warm and the carrier is cold, they drop on pretty easy. And I'm just going to lightly put 2 ring gear bolts, and maybe we'll do 4, just to keep that centered while it cools down. I don't want to put Loctite on the bolts while the carrier's still hot. So we'll just lightly snug these up to make sure the ring is drawn up against the face of the locker while everything settles back down. And then just to be on the safe side, I'm going to mark the head of each of those with a dab of paint. That way I know that those are in there, but they don't have any Loctite on them. And then when we go back through, after this is cooled down, we can take those out, put Loctite on them, and then torque everything in a pattern. And then once the ring is torqued on, we'll put the carrier bearings back on. I like to go ahead and get the ring all the way torqued. That way this isn't flopping all around and there's not a chance of me dropping it and hitting the carrier bearings. So we do those last. So I'm going to let this cool down and we'll come back and put the ring gear bolts in, torque them, and put the carrier bearings on. Okay, so the carrier and the ring have finally cooled down enough that we can touch them by hand. So we can start putting Loctite on the carrier bolts. Just put, a drop on each one and drop them in. We'll pull the ones we put in there temporarily back out. We'll put some Loctite on those. And then we'll just zip these down. In a semi-star pattern. Just get them all started. And then when I do my actual torquing, I like to clamp them in the press. So let me move this over there and I'll bring the camera back and get you set up. So we've got the carrier assembly clamped down in the press. I've got an aluminum puck on the top and then another one on the bottom so that when we clamp it we don't have anything hard against the bearing surfaces of the carrier. But this seems to be the easiest way to clamp it. So then we'll go ahead and torque these up to 101 in a crisscross pattern. And once I've got most of them crisscrossed, I just go around in a circle to make sure I've hit all of them. And I usually go around twice just to be sure that I got everything. There we go. Our ring gear is on. And then I like to take my paint marker and just draw a line from the bolt down onto the carrier on each one. It makes it easy to tell later on if for some reason there's a problem. You can go back and pretty easily see if one of the bolts has moved or come loose. That reminds me that I've torqued these, so I don't second guess myself thinking I haven't. And let me get the bearing press plates out and we'll start pressing carrier bearings on. Now we're back to start pressing the carrier bearings on. Had to take a quick intermission. None of our press tools had the right ID to clear the air locker housing and also clear the bearing cage, so I had to spin one of them down on the lathe real quick. Tune into next week's Tuesday's Tool to see that action. Now, we can go ahead and press these on. Like so. And then there's the sleeve we had to clear. Grab my other bearing. And now we're finally ready to start actually putting things back in the differential housing. So let me get the camera set back up and we'll be back. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put the differential back in the housing, and I've lightly snugged the bearings together, and the bearing cap bolts are lightly snugged. So now we can adjust our dial indicator, and it's sitting on the adjuster nut on the ring side. And we can go ahead and adjust for our bearing preload. So we just tighten this side until we see that needle jump. And there it goes. And then we're going to go a turn tighter than that. Or not a turn, I'm sorry, one notch on the adjuster's tighter than that. So now we know our preload's set. Now we can start dealing with backlash. And right now, we're sitting about 3 thousandths of backlash, and we had 10 thousandths when we took it apart. So we're going to loosen the ring gear side by a notch. I don't want to look too far. And tighten the pinion side by a notch. And you always do them in a matched number of notches, that way your preload stays the same. Okay, now we're at about 6 thousandths. So we'll loosen this guy up one more. Come on, go in there. Tighten that guy up a notch. And we're about 8 I hate it on when you do the ARBs, they don't have the pinholes to use the normal adjusters. You've got to use a chisel and just thump them around. For the normal Toyota carriers, these guys are awesome. I think I got it from Randy's Ring and Pinion. But it lets you use a ratchet to adjust. So we'll tighten the pinion one more. And there we go. Right on 10 thousandths. So now we can torque our carrier bearings to 66 foot-pounds. There we go. Double check that our backlash is still good. And we're still at 10. And there's 10. And then what I like to do is I'll then pull the carrier bolts one at a time now that I've verified. And add a little Loctite to them. Torque that. We take our paint pen and do a witness line. And then we know that one's been torqued. So let me go do the rest of these and we'll come back. Okay, we've got all our bearing cap bolts tightened and witness marked. I went ahead and wiggled the air collar on. I was just planning to test fit it and was going to pull it back off to show you guys wiggling it on, but yeah, it was a pain. I'm not pulling it back off. So it's stuck on there and you just want to kind of wiggle it and make sure you don't roll the square O-rings as you're putting it in. They're real easy to cut, real easy to roll over. So then you take this wire retainer and it goes in this half moon cut on one side, half moon cut over here, and then there's a little flap down here at the bottom. You just take a small screwdriver and snap it in like that. And then we take our adjuster lock, stick that in there, a little Loctite on it, on the bolt. Snug that guy up. And then we can route our airline according to the ARB picture. Which is something about like that. And then you want to make sure that there's a little bit of float in this guy, that it can wiggle, which we've got ever so slight bit, so it's good. And then normally you would trim the tail line sticking out down here. We're waiting on some stainless braided lines to come in, so it's going to be a little bit different down here. So yeah, so now except for the fitting on the outside of the housing, we're all ready to throw this back in and just put the axles back in the reverse order we took them out, and it's good to go. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. If you like what you saw, please subscribe below.